Well, first of all, thank everyone for coming on the call. My name is Owen Patterson. I'm the Member of Parliament for North Shropshire. Declare an interest. I've got the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital in my patch. Important for us, the Midlands Centre for Spinal Injuries. Well, I have to declare an interest twice. I nearly broke my neck 10 years ago, and I successfully broke my neck in 3 places 2 years ago. And thanks to the Midlands Centre for Spinal Injuries and the unbelievable skill of the people there, I am talking to you now sitting upright and can walk around. So I have a very strong interest in promoting better care for spinal injuries patients. And just to remind everyone, 6 people today will have a spinal injury so severe that they may never walk again. So with that, very pleased to welcome you all to the inaugural meeting of the All-Party Group. And can I, first of all, I think as we're remote, can I ask all MPs on to declare who they are and where they're from? Just so, because we've got everybody listening, by the way, we've got observers in on this. I didn't see the point in having sheep and goats. But if we could just have MPs first, in case we have to do any voting, could you please do a quick rattle round and say you're here? First of all, Meg Hillier, Dawn Butler, no. Ben Everett.
And those are the apologies that you've got there.
Oh, they're the apologies. Sorry, I got the wrong ones.
You're not going to get anyone from that list, I'm afraid.
No, sorry. So, okay, well, so who is on then?
Okay, so I'm Conor McGinn.
I saw Conor.
I'm Conor McGinn. Yeah, I'm the MP for the Labour MP for St Helens North.
Good.
Graham Brady, Altrincham West.
Mark Tarmy, MP for Allen and Deeside.
Very good of you to come up. Thank you very much.
Rob Butler, the MP for Aylesbury. So I have the National Spinal Injuries Centre at Stoke Mandeville in my constituency.
Thanks very much. Very good. Anyone else? No? Dave, can you then tell us who's sent apologies?
Yeah, certainly. We've had apologies from Meg Hillier, Dawn Butler, Ben Everett, Dame Cheryl Gillan, Duncan Baker, Lord Putnam, Chris Skidmore, Catherine Fletcher, and also Sir Roger Gale, although he may pop in a bit later.
Okay, and then we haven't mentioned peers. If we move to the House of Lords, who have we got present?
Oh, me, Norman Tabbett.
Very good to see you, Norman.
Well, thanks.
Sue Massam.
Very good to see you, Sue, all your experience. Anyone else? Any apologies from the House of Lords? Right.
No other apologies than the ones I've mentioned, that's it.
No, okay, no. Right. Can we move on to election of officers? Can I, with all modesty, put myself forward as chairman?
Can I second that?
Any other names being put forward?
Gone.
Agreed.
On that basis, if you're happy, I'll count myself as elected chairman with all humility. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can I propose Lady Massam is vice chairman?
We can have several vice chairmen.
But I think you should be named first, given your experience.
I second this, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Maggie, I'm not sure you got a vote because you're not in Parliament.
Sorry. May I qualify?
Conor,
Can I propose Mark, at the risk of probably never getting a purr again, can I propose Mark Tammy, our purring whip, as the vice chair of the APPG?
Very good. So we got 2 vice chairmen, Sue Massam and Mark Tammy. It would be excellent if they both agreed to do it.
Yes, that's fine by me.
That's marvellous. That's really good. Very helpful. Very helpful to have someone from Wales too, given our position at the orthopaedic. Good. Any other vice chairman anyone would like to nominate?
Yeah.
Graham Brady.
Sorry, who is nominating Graham Brady?
Well, I would if I could.
Well, I'm very
But I
happy to
don't have
nominate
voting
Graham. I'm very happy to nominate Graham.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yay!
and you're happy to do it.
And I'm happy to second him.
Very good. Okay, Graham, you're on board. Anyone else to be vice chairman?
What
Dave,
about Lord Tebbit?
Lord Tebbit like to take a role? You could be a vice chairman, or you could be. Do we
Norman,
need a
your
Dave, do
microphone
we,
is
do we need a
muted.
secretary? Dave, do we need a secretary, by the way, to be to conform? No. Okay.
I don't believe so. No, as long as we've got a chair and a vice chair, then we are good to go.
Okay. Well, I'm very happy to nominate Norman Tebbit. Anyone else like to second him?
Seconded.
And I'll second him,
Very good.
or third him.
Excellent. All right. Well, on that, I think we've probably got enough officers. Ed, can we move on to the next item? Thank you very much for the elections, and many congratulations to all those elected. Dan Burden is now going to talk to us. I think, do you have a video, Dan?
The video is going to come in Dave's presentation.
Dave, sorry. Okay. So basically, Dan is going to explain the impact of Corona and the particular needs of people with spinal injuries.
Okay, right. Well, thanks very much, Owen. Firstly, it's fantastic to see that the APPG has been reconstituted, as we have never needed this group more than we need it at the moment. We're at risk of losing a generation of spinal cord injured people due to the pressure that coronavirus has had on health and care services. Specialist rehabilitation, vital care services, and independent living have all been hit hard by the pandemic. And now more than ever, we need MPs to stand, and peers, to stand up for our community in Parliament and to avoid a lost generation of spinal cord injured people. So I'd like to speak to you about how coronavirus has impacted the lives of spinal cord injured people, how SIA and our partners are planning to identify the key emerging issues, and how you can help us to build a strong and effective all-party parliamentary group that can really take on these issues over the course of the year. So first, a bit about myself. I was injured 20 years ago in Egypt. I fell down a hole in a building site and broke my back and ended up paralyzed from the chest down. Within 3 days, I've been airlifted from Cairo to the Spinal Injuries Centre in Stoke Mandeville, the National Spinal Injury Centre. There I received fantastic rehabilitation. I was educated on my condition. I was educated what it means to be paralyzed from the chest down and unable to move your legs. I was taught about how to manage that double incontinence, both fecal and urinal continence, and importantly, how to stay healthy and how to avoid the additional complications which are so endemic with spinal cord injured people. Pressure ulcers, which Dave will be speaking to you about later on, urinary tract infections. I was taught how to deal with life as a wheelchair user and how to actually physically manage a wheelchair and getting around from A to B using a car, just getting out of your house, getting down the street. And most importantly, I was taught that holistic rehab, the belief that I would be able to live a normal life. That at 24 years old, I should still have that ambition of getting back into work, continuing my social life with my friends and family, and also having those aspirations that everyone else has, those aspirations of living a life, a fulfilled life, raising a family. I mention that because I had a daughter 6 weeks ago, just thought I'd drop that one in. But all of those things that everybody just takes for granted, I wasn't only given the belief that I could achieve that, but the expectation that was the expectation for my life leaving a spinal injury centre. And that's why I'm here today speaking to you, because of that grounding I received in the Spinal Injury Centre. I owe my life to that service, as do thousands of other people. And one of our big concerns at the moment is that today these services are under severe pressure like never before. We've spoken before to the APPG about how, by the NHS's own reckoning, the service is 50 beds short to meet the needs of spinal cord injured people. To put that into context, if that was all in one specific hospital, that would be the third biggest centre in the UK. And this was all pre-coronavirus. Now the capacity issues have increased during COVID, and those who don't get in face a skeleton service in the spinal injury centres. Waves of people were discharged early from the spinal injury centres to make way for the anticipated coronavirus patients. These truncated rehab stays would not have gone into the same depth and were unable to go into the same depth as the rehab that I benefited from 20 years ago. Gyms are closed across the spinal injury centres, that essential building block of rehabilitation, of learning to live a new life in a wheelchair. And the spinal injury centres are doing a fantastic job of soldiering on without those services available to them. But by any stretch of the imagination, it is not the same service that we were able to take part of because of these pressures. I mean, I even discovered recently that one of the spinal centres has been unable to provide any psychological support during this entire time. And everybody has had an impact on their mental health during this year. And just imagine that, having that news that you will never walk again and having absolutely no contact with friends and family, and somehow just being able to get on top of this in your own head. Patient education has ground to a halt across the service. That aspirational element I was talking about is being lost due to the pressures that the spinal cord injury centres are finding themselves under. Without that education, long-term health issues will be rife in the future at a cost not only to the health service, but to the individual. And there's been that lost link to organisations like Spinal Injuries Association that I work for, and other charities, Aspire, Backup, that provide support and provide that holistic, rounded rehabilitation. So those networks are being undermined. People are separated from friends and family at that critical time. You know, people who have had paralysis of the arms will actually not really even be able to hold up a tablet or a phone and speak to their friends virtually. Charities like SIA, Aspire and Backup have been unable to get access. And these are professional peer-led services. They are part of the NHS care pathway for spinal cord injury, but we just haven't been able to access people in the centres and support them. We can do this virtually, but it is no substitute for having somebody in a wheelchair roll up to your bed and say, you know what, everything is going to be fine. One day you will be out of here, and one day you will be living a life in the same way that I am. And one of the things that we're really keen to ask the APPG is whether we can raise those concerns with Matt Hancock and try and get charity peer support services access to the spinal injury centres. But it isn't only spinal injury centres that have been affected. COVID-19 has drawn greater attention to the impact of years of funding cuts in the care sector. But to call it a care service dramatically underplays the impact of this service, which is so undervalued by society. It's an enabling service, which allows people to take control of their lives and achieve their aspirations. We've spoken to the APPG before about eligibility for continuing healthcare and the provision of adequate care packages. But now we are seeing the care service thrust into the front line of the pandemic crisis. We need carers and care support more than ever. Approximately 25% of spinal cord injured people are reliant on care to live the independent lives. People on this call right now, working for SIA, working for other charities, organisations, are here because they are unable to do so by their care package. And when we talk about care package, quite often over the last few months, the discussion has been about care homes. Actually, spinal cord injured people are much more used to having that care provided in their own homes. This is the way that they can truly get control of their lives and the way that they want to live them. And this is often self-funded. Excuse me one second. our support line has been inundated by people calling with fears about how they are going to be able to hire in carers after Brexit to support them. The low paid roles, care roles, are not on the shortage occupation list. There's a lot of talk about replacing these roles or trying to fill this deficit with domestic workers, but that living in somebody else's house 24/7, 2 weeks, is something that loans itself much more to
Dan, I think we get some interference from someone. Thank you very much. Someone's muted.
Thank you, Owen. But yeah, as I was saying, those low paid roles are not on the shortage occupation list. The Migration Advisory Committee has warned of stark consequences if we effectively pull the rug out from the service without establishing how we are going to fill those vacancies in the service. And these regulations are also unclear to care providers. I've been having conversations with care providers. They still don't know how they are going to be bringing people in to fill that gap, and actually what is expected of them and what they can and can't do. And this is a vicious circle, because those these kind of issues in the care service will lead to a greater strain on health services, who are generally left to pick up the pieces when care falls apart. Perhaps most importantly, without those enabling care services, this can undo the vital skills that people learn during rehabilitation, leaving individuals actually less independent. I'm told by the spinal injury centres, there's nothing worse than seeing somebody come back, somebody that they've sent out of the spinal injury centre with that aspiration to live their life and to go out and be independent, and coming back effectively broken by the inability of community health care services to actually pick those needs up. And one of the things that we would really like to see at the APPG in the future would be whether we could bring in Helen Whatley, the Care Minister, or her opposite number, Liz Kendall, to speak about some of these issues. Spinal cord injured people are amongst the most vulnerable in society. Those people who were previously isolated have probably found themselves even more so after coronavirus. Many of them are still continuing to shield because of the risk that coronavirus poses to them. And others are coping with the breakdown of the new circles of support that were built up over the first lockdown, when communities were coming together and supporting people. People weren't working in the office, they were working at home, and previously isolated people were finding themselves surrounded by families, friends, neighbours, who have now all gone back to work, and all of that is slowly unravelling. One of the big concerns in amongst this kind of whole vulnerability question is that NHS England has identified spinal cord injured people as being at high risk from coronavirus. Yet tetraplegics, someone who's got paralysis of all 4 limbs, and paraplegic, those who've got paralysis of 2 limbs, have not found themselves on the vulnerable list. This is despite the fact that many of them have a compromised respiratory system, paralysis of the intercostal muscles, which effectively govern breathing, and an increased likelihood of treatment in intensive care if they were to come ill with coronavirus. So I've had a number of members reach out to me before this meeting, basically asking me to ask the APPG, how do we get onto the vulnerable list or the immunisation priority list? There's a lot of fear out there and a lot of concern, particularly when a respiratory illness is rife.
Dan, you have frozen.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yep, you're back now.
Oh, phew, gosh, that was a thanks, Owen.
Just to wind back, how long were you speaking for?
I don't know.
You just mentioned the immunisation priority list.
Oh, okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so all I was going to say following on from that, so this is something that members have got in touch with me before this meeting to ask me to actually put to the APPG. And I just wanted to say that SIA and our partners are working to identify these emerging priorities at this critical point in time. We're planning to start a big conversation with the SCI community, which we're hoping is going to be the biggest exercise of its kind, reaching out to spinal cord injured people to say, what is it that matters to you now in the new normal of a world with coronavirus? We're going to be launching this next month, and we really want to bring the results of this back to the APPG in future meetings so that we can make sure that we're addressing the needs that matter most to spinal cord injured people in 2020. So I'll break in a second for any questions or discussion about what I've said, but one thing that I would just like to say to the APPG members in the group, the parliamentarians, which is, what can you do to help us? What can you do to help bring other people into the group, MPs with specialisms in disability, in health, in care? There are 11 spinal injury centres in the country. Each has their own MP. Do any of you know them? Could you give them a nudge that this would be a group that they should join? Jordan, I don't know if you can hear me, and I don't know if you can put up a list of who those 11 MPs are now, but that would be amazing.
I can share the list now.
Thanks very much, Jordan. That's fantastic. Can we be bringing ministers in or members from the opposition front bench to discuss some of the issues? And most importantly, who is it that you would like to hear from in these meetings? So I'll stop there. Thanks for bearing with me if you lost me entirely. Jordan can share this whilst we talk, but over to you.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. That very helpful summary. I think members of Parliament would like to know what are the sort of, say, top 3 or 4 priorities. So if they bump into a minister, if they're in questions and there's a free hit, what I think would be good if we put out the 3 or 4 immediate priorities that we would like MPs to raise with ministers, and we could do that straight away. Do you have those off the top of your head, or do you think we should do a right round, send round to everybody later?
Well, everybody will have a different view. I think it's for those newly injured people, it's about making sure that we can link people into those specialist services. I think
you froze.
Trying to be the fears of that most. Oh,
sorry, Dad. Just wind back again. You broke. You froze.
Yeah. Just to say that if I drop out again, maybe one of my colleagues can pick up. So I think it's that. I think another issue is the care issue. How we are going to plug the gap which is going to be left by EU workers. Whether we can be looking at those kind of lower tier care workers to actually bring them onto the shortage occupations list. And Dave will be speaking a bit later as well about pressure ulcers, and I think that would be one of the key issues that we'd want to take forward as well. Actually, you know, I don't want to preempt what he's going to say, but highlighting the devastating impact that pressure ulcers have on people, the high cost, and the lack of research and the lack of new treatment which is going on in this area, and how. Yeah. But we'll come to that later. Maybe I can circulate something at the end of the meeting, Owen.
Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful. Okay, had my shot. Who else would like to ask a question? No more questions? No? Okay, well done. Thank you very much. I thought it was very helpful, that quick summary. If you could come up with 3 or 4 ideas, that would be really good. If no one else got a question, shall we move on to Dave Bratcher, who's going to talk about pressure ulcers and the impact on spinal injured people. Dave,
thank you, Owen. That's great. I'm going to kick off with a very short video just to bring a patient perspective into this meeting. It lasts about 3 minutes, so it's not going to take up too much of your time. But Jordan, if you could hit the play button, that would be brilliant.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great.
My name is Jamie Rind. I'm 42 years old. I sustained my spinal cord injury in 1998, diving into shallow water. Broke my neck at level C5. I'm a C5-6 tetraplegic. I was really fortunate. The same day I had my injury, I was transferred to the Princess Royal Spinal Injuries Rehabilitation Centre in Sheffield, where I spent the next 9 months engaging in an intensive programme of rehabilitation. I rebuilt my life to a degree. I was re-engaging with friends. I'd been in a relationship for a little while and was just really enjoying life. I noticed a mark on my bottom. You know, looked at it initially, thought it was just a spot. It then deteriorated to a point where I knew that I needed to get some advice, some support from a clinician. I then called upon the district nursing service, the local district nursing service, who came out to see me, and then informed me that it was a pressure sore. I think from that point on, things really deteriorated. We tried to manage it conservatively. The kind of days rolled into weeks, the weeks rolled into months, and before I knew it, I'd been on bed rest for the best part of a year. To not be feeling unwell, but to be confined to bed was undoubtedly the hardest experience of my life, more difficult to cope with than my initial injury. And the psychological impact that it had on me was devastating. The real tipping point for improving my situation and moving on and healing my pressure sore was when I contacted the spinal centre. After consultation with an outreach nurse and then speaking to the consultant weeks later, he put it in pretty stark terms. If I continued to attempt to manage my pressure ulcer in a conservative way, I could be looking at another 2 years on bed rest. If I went for a surgical intervention, then it would be a period in hospital of 3 months, and then a similar period on bed rest at home, and then I could get on and start mobilising and get on my life. I think whilst the impact of that initial pressure sore has long been consigned to the past, managing my skin and the impact of pressure is the one single thing that impacts my life more than anything. It's the thing I worry about more than anything, and it's the thing that will inhibit me living a full and fulfilled life, even to this day. I check my skin religiously and regularly, but even that still doesn't wholly prevent issues. My advice to you would be become an expert in managing your spinal cord injury. Educate yourself and surround yourself with healthcare professionals that understand and are knowledgeable about the condition.
Thank you, Jordan. The chap that you've just seen in the video is Jamie Rind. He works for SIA, has done for a number of years. He's our head of services, and he was talking about. And what I wanted to illustrate to you really was just the brutal reality of pressure ulcers for spinal cord injured people. Pressure ulcers are often considered to be the easiest to prevent but the hardest to treat problems experienced by the spinal cord injury community. And as Jamie said, they can lead to months in bed, ongoing health issues, and in some cases they lead to sepsis and death. Pressure ulcers are an absolutely huge issue for the NHS and completely devastating to the lives of SCI people and their families. So to explain some of the medical side of this to you briefly, the skin below the level of a person's spinal cord injury acts very differently to the area of skin above it. So there are several factors in this, including blood circulation, reduced elasticity, nutrition, correct hydration, but really the major contributing factor is a loss of sensation. To put it simply, if you can't feel your skin, then you won't know when you're damaging it because your body's feedback mechanisms simply don't work. And when you add immobility to all this and the amount of time we spend in wheelchairs, then really the odds are greatly stacked against a spinal cord injured person. But having said all that, skin damage is eminently preventable with the right knowledge and support, and prevention is always going to be better than a cure. And in 2020, it's simply unacceptable for people to be living with pressure ulcers due to inadequate care, a lack of knowledge, or ineffective treatment options. And really, this has to change. Now, tomorrow is Stop the Pressure Day. It's a national initiative, and it's aimed at raising awareness of the issues of pressure ulcers because, as I've already said, prevention is far and away the most effective way of dealing with an ulcer. In fact, NHS England believe that almost all pressure ulcers are preventable if the correct guidelines and practices are followed. And the Royal College of Nursing has recommended, and I quote, all healthcare professionals should be educated about pressure ulcer risk assessment and prevention, selection, use and maintenance of pressure relieving devices, and patient education and information giving, unquote. So, given this approach by NHS England that pressure ulcers are preventable, and given that's been endorsed by the Royal College of Nursing, you'd be forgiven for thinking that pressure ulcers would be a rarity in medical and care settings, and that they'd be an occasional occurrence instead of a regular feature. And yet, the financial implications of pressure ulcers are a huge concern for the NHS and private care facilities because the numbers are just astonishing. Nationally, between 1,700 and 2,000 patients develop a pressure ulcer every month. And NHS England reports that treating pressure ulcers costs the NHS more than £3.8 million per day. And it's estimated that the cost of pressure ulcer care is about 4% of total NHS expenditure, and more than 90% of pressure care treatment cost is about nurse time. And even aside from those numbers, interestingly, litigation costs relating to pressure ulcers were over £20.8 million in 2017 to 18, which was an increase of 53% in just 3 years. And this, of course, is only the financial cost. As Jamie illustrated so well in the video, pressure ulcers have a massive impact on the individual in terms of what they can and can't do whilst their ulcer is healing, and how it affects all aspects of their life, and very often impacting on their mental health as well. I've had my spinal cord injury for about 12 years. From my own experience, the pressure ulcers I've had, and I've had 3 or 4, have dramatically reduced my ability to engage with my family and friends, with my ability to work. You know, on one occasion, I even missed a long anticipated and much needed family holiday because I had to stay in bed at home. And believe me, no one was happy about that. So national research into pressure ulcers has recently been undertaken through the Duke of Cornwall's spinal unit in Salisbury. And it's highlighted just how concerned spinal cord injured people are about pressure ulcers. So through an online questionnaire, the researchers found that 91% of respondents had personally experienced a pressure ulcer, and 94% of respondents were either a little worried or very worried about developing a pressure ulcer, which I think speaks to the point Jamie made about being hypervigilant. Only 6% of people were not worried at all. 92% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that there should be further research into pressure ulcer prevention. And the biggest risk for acquiring a pressure ulcer was identified as using inadequate seating that hadn't been adapted for people with an SCI because our needs are so specialized. I think these numbers point towards the general lack of understanding in community services about spinal cord injured people and their needs. A spinal cord injury is a really complicated specialist condition, and this should surely mean that community services seek the earliest possible involvement of spinal cord injury specialists for advice and guidance, especially with something as serious or potentially serious as a pressure ulcer. We believe this would go a long way to preventing these atrocious, avoidable, and long-lasting injuries escalating into those much more serious medical issues. And Dan talked about the potential lost generation this year of people who have either been in spinal centres but not been getting the full rehab experience, or haven't been able to get into spinal centres. If these people haven't been educated into how to manage their condition, they are a pressure ulcer waiting to happen, and they will circulate back into the NHS and cost it far more money in terms of then trying to treat a problem instead of taking a preventative approach and stop it happening in the first place. Now, data is absolutely vital to help understand the scale of the issue for SCI people. At the moment, the information that's held on the National SCI database on pressure ulcers is quite limited and incomplete. And we need the spinal centres to make sure they're inputting this information correctly, because this will then help to prove the drain on spinal centre resources for these easily avoidable wounds. So, for example, how many bed days were lost because a newly injured spinal cord injured person was admitted with a pressure ulcer, or because of spinal cord injured people being admitted as outpatients with these avoidable complications. So given the financial costs of pressure ulcers to the NHS and healthcare systems worldwide, and the devastating impact on the individual and their family, it really is astonishing that a more proactive and focused approach isn't being taken to develop better ways to prevent and treat pressure ulcers. As Dan touched on, there's a desperate need for more research and better treatment options for people affected by pressure ulcers, so that we can help them become the rare exception rather than the norm. With everything else going on in the world, research into anything other than a vaccine for coronavirus seems to have stalled in 2020. But there are potentially transformational products out there that deserve to be properly researched and tested to see if they can improve the recovery time from a pressure ulcer. And to repeat, at the risk of being boring, prevention still remains a far more effective solution than a cure, hence the need to raise awareness inside and outside the NHS and ensure that everyone acts to prevent these devastating and potentially life-threatening pressure ulcers occurring in the first place. So in terms of what I wanted to get commitment from the APPG from, what we're asking of the APPG, we think a series of parliamentary questions relating specifically to spinal cord injury and pressure ulcers may help to address or start to address the data side of things and encourage spinal centres to fill the information on their forms, get that into the system more robustly. We'd really appreciate any sort of social media take up tomorrow around Stop the Pressure, and that can either be through the Stop the Pressure directly or through SIA. We'll be active on that tomorrow. And we also think that perhaps a co-signed letter from the people on the APPG, the MPs on the APPG, to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, to Matt Hancock, to seek a commitment from the government to support increased investment and research into improved pressure ulcer prevention and innovative new treatments would also start the ball rolling on that. So I hope that explains why pressure ulcers are such an issue for spinal cord injured people. And obviously very happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
I'll mute myself. Dave, thank you very much indeed. That was very helpful. Your figures are astonishing. I mean, 1,700 to 2,000 a month, 3.8 million a day is really extraordinary.
Yep.
Just you touched on Stop the Pressure Day tomorrow. Again, going back to our sort of slightly trite idea of three main ideas. Are there any particular demands coming out of the day tomorrow so everyone can coordinate? You mentioned 2 or 3 at the end of your statement.
The main thing about Stop the Pressure Day is about awareness. You know, there is an absolute ton and a half of resources that are available to individuals, to NHS staff, to care staff, and so on, actually on the Stop the Pressure website. But if people don't go there and don't use those materials, then they're not going to be in a position to educate themselves about how to stop pressure ulcers happening in the first place. So anything that we can do around simply raising awareness tomorrow would be fantastic.
Oh, what's tomorrow?
Tomorrow is Stop the Pressure Day. Chance for us all to say our piece, get out on social media, etc. Sorry, someone's popped up at the bottom. Rob, was that Rob had a question?
Yes, I do, please. Owen, thanks very much indeed. Dave, first and foremost, thank you for that fantastically informative presentation. I didn't know very much of that at all, probably 10%. So really, really valuable. Owen has pulled out the most shocking of the statistics. And I take your point about PQs, and I'm sure parliamentary colleagues on this call will work out the best way to do that. I just wonder if you've got some ideas in terms of prevention. I mean, you've highlighted that prevention is always so much easier than treatment. Are there some key takeaways that we should be asking about in the prevention aspect?
I think prevention for me comes down to two things, and Dan may want to contribute to this in a moment as well, but increased awareness will help with prevention, because if people are being as strict as Jamie was he explained in the video about how he looks after his skin, I think that could make a massive difference. And we know that there are a lot of people who don't know how to manage their spinal cord injury and the conditions that come with it, because they didn't get the specialist input they needed when they were first injured. I think the other aspect to it is about that increased research. You know, we're aware of bits of research that are happening around, different cushions or an early warning system or using pressure maps and so on. But these things don't seem to be coming through in the way that we would like them to. You know, given the technology that is out there, it genuinely is a surprise that I'm basically sitting on a lump of foam, and it's not gone much further than that in the last 12 years. And then I think that in terms of the if pressure ulcers develop, you know, we know there are some really interesting products out there that, as I said earlier, you know, they really deserve the chance to have the research done to see if they can make that difference, to get onto the drugs tariff and so on. But we need to make that happen.
Sorry, someone's trying to come in.
Sorry, just a quick thing. I don't think anybody really knows me, apart from maybe a couple of people. I'm just 3 years in, and I'm still learning. I'm amazed that people with 20 years are still cheerful. But anyway, one thing that I took away from my time at Salisbury, I got pressure ulcers on my heels from being in bed. And about a month or two after that, I was given these. They're just foam boots, and they're sort of comfy, and they've got a hole in the bottom, and they let air in, but they just take your heel off. And they cost 50 quid. But as a result of not having those, I was sent off to a place called Healogic, which is a specialist pressure sore place once or maybe even twice a week, and the NHS spent thousands and thousands on getting rid of these sores on my heels. And if everybody who left a unit were given a pair of those as a pack, as part of a pack, an exit pack, it would save lots of money, I think.
I can go.
Could I just chip in? I had a distortion at the beginning. Who was speaking just then, please? Because we are, I should have said earlier, we are recording this whole session, but just so we've got an accurate record. Sorry, your name is?
My name's Edward.
Edward, very good.
Edward, I think you're absolutely right. I can actually make it even simpler. I've spent the last 10 years sleeping with my heels raised from my bed by a couple of pillows, just to keep my heels clear of the bed, because I had a pressure ulcer on my heel a few years ago, so it's a vulnerable area for me, and I need to protect it. I find it really interesting at the moment. You know, we're seeing lots of television pictures of people in intensive care because of COVID-19. It will be really interesting to see if the incidence of pressure ulcers in general goes up in 2020 because of more people being immobile because of being in intensive care, and you know how that's being managed in intensive care units.
And sorry, can I just chip in there as well? Just in answer to Rob Butler's question, one of the other things as well is actually making sure, as I was saying earlier, people are linked in with that specialist service. If you're not given that education, you don't understand it's an issue. Pressure ulcer only becomes an issue when one day you look down, you've got a huge open wound. So it's always maintaining those links and getting people linked into that spinal centre to get that education.
Right, very helpful. Norman, you got a question?
Yes, this springs from experience of helping my wife to cope with her injuries inflicted back in 1984. Very simple, not only just plain good nursing techniques, but sheepskin.
Mm-hmm.
There is probably nothing better than that for preventing sores.
Real sheepskin, real sheepskin.
Yes, real sheepskin, no, none of the imitation stuff, the genuine sheepskin.
Well, Norman, when Rose and I did the Mongol Derby, we both sat on sheepskins for 14 hours a day for 10 days, and it worked. I totally agree with you, my experience. But I think coming out of this actually is something interesting. We should perhaps be, as a group, be investigating technologies. As Dave said, he's sitting on a bit of foam, which has probably been going since the 1950s. And just as a suggestion, we'll move on to any other business shortly. How we can be more effective would be perhaps launching our own investigation, going around manufacturers and listening to technologists and health researchers of better technologies, and we might be able to get them introduced into the NHS faster, just as a suggestion. And Norma's idea of sheepskin could be a very, very good one.
Indeed. Also, I will, if I may, write to you, because I can't remember the name of the firm and the guys concerned, but my wife had an implant which has allowed her to be completely continent without any tubes or what have you, or anything of that kind, for the last umpteen years. And I think that's a technique which could be used far more often.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, I think.
Okay, any other questions for Dave? Because we might move on to any other business of what we actually do as a group and how we make it more effective. And any other questions, particularly on pressure sores?
Can I just say one more thing in response to Mr. Tebbett's comment about lamb's wool or sheepskin? The price of sheepskin, I happen to know, is on the floor at the moment. So if there was a programme to put together to pass out lamb's wool or sheepskin to the SCI community, and now would be a perfect time to do it.
Yeah, quite right. You're absolutely right. The wool price has totally collapsed. Right. Any other comments on
I'm sure
ulcers?
Sorry. Futures.
Sorry.
Someone else got a question?
Sorry.
Who's that? That's Brian O'Shea. You've got something to tell us about the implant?
It's just that the name of, I'm assuming the name of the implant that Lord Tebbett is referring to is the sacral anterior root stimulator, which I suspect Waggy knows a lot more about than me.
Yes, that's Professor Brindley's
yes.
invention, and it does work if it's adequately inserted in the right patients. It's a very good tool to keep continence.
How does it work, Waggy? Waggy, how does it work?
It just stimulates the nerves that go to the bladder and empty the bladder completely. It stops the nerve that make the bladder contract, the sensory nerves, from reaching the spinal cord when the bladder is full. So it takes control of the emptying and filling of the bladder with almost completely, removing this reflex function that causes incontinence.
That's the one. Yeah, just say.
Very good. That's very
Can
helpful.
I make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
By the way, wait.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry to have to say this, but when I went into spinal injuries in 1971, I could not have dreamt that 50 years later, almost 50 years later, that we will be talking about complications of spinal cord injuries. In the mid-40s, Sir Ludwig Guttmann at Stoke Mandeville demonstrated how to prevent all complications of spinal cord injuries. All of them. We're talking about pressure sores. There are many, many other complications that occur easily in individuals with spinal cord injury, other than pressure sores, and that cost the taxpayer when they develop an enormous amount of money to treat. Furthermore, some of these complications leave a weakness throughout the individual's life, i.e., many of them recur because they happened initially, and many of them prevent the total full independence that the patient is capable and would have been able to achieve if, as a patient, this person was treated adequately. Now, having said that, many of these complications that affect the level of independence cost the taxpayers in care support in the community if the individual doesn't reach the level of independence that they are capable of doing. It's the lifelong cost of day in, day out care support of the individual. And, it's not just the financial cost. The financial cost is enormous. The cost, the emotional and the social cost of giving a support that would not have been required day in, day out for the rest of the individual's life. And really, it's incredible that 70 plus years after our British system of methods of treatment and model of service delivery to the individuals with spinal cord injury, that was the envy of the world, and that was demonstrated to be the best method and the cheapest method to treat patients. Yeah. Sorry.
That is extremely helpful. It is extraordinary. 70 years on, we've not learned the lessons from Guttmann. I'm noticing some members have had to leave, and we did intend to limit the meeting to an hour. I think you've morphed naturally on from Dave's statement on pressure ulcers. I think we should all, on pressure ulcers, by the way, all pile in on the social media and any other methods tomorrow on Stop the Pressure Day. But you've morphed onto the basically any other business, which is, what's this group for and how can we make it more worthwhile and actually achieve something positive? And my sort of 2 points, Pennyworth, would be that if we set our target is to basically get across the awareness of the problem. And basically, until I broke my neck, I thought spinal injuries units dealt with hard things like bones. They don't. They deal with soft things like bowels and bladders and pressure sores. And I do think we have a role to play in getting across that message. And then what you've just been talking about, Waggy, which of course I experienced when I was in the Midlands Centre, is the superior lessons. And it is extraordinary that the Goodman lessons have not been taken on board over the past 70 years. And the third point, I think, would be the idea of technology. I mean, Norman's idea on sheepskins is probably a very good one, and the implant, which I'd never heard of until this meeting. So I've already learned something very important in the course of the meeting. But we thought to have a meeting every 3 months. We were possibly suggesting, open to ideas, because I think we do any other business in the next meeting at the same time, probably do it on a Wednesday evening, if everyone would agree, and possibly make it the first Wednesday, March, June, September, and then November, because we don't want to run into Christmas. But I'm open to ideas of how we do that, and very much open to ideas how we can make this all-party group more effective and get the message, get those 3 messages across, which I would propose as our basis for the year. Anyone like to react to what I've just said?
I just want to say something just before that, after what you said about pressure sores. Yesterday we had the medicines and medical devices bill in the Lords, and I did mention the 3 Bs, as you've mentioned it, bowels, bladders and bed sores. I try and bring up in Parliament a bit about spinal injuries whenever I can. But I do think it's good to bring in more MPs and more members of the House of Lords to these meetings.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly try to do that. It's very helpful having Mark Tammy, who's sadly just had to go, but I think we need a real push to get more members along, particularly all those members that represent the spinal injury centres. I think that is really important. But does everybody think a Wednesday evening is a good time to do it? Dave, Dan, can you remember what time were we going to suggest?
I think we were looking at 3:30, so the same time as this.
Okay.
I think, Owen, as well, it's important to hold on to those issues of obviously the shortfall in the spinal injury centres, that we're a 50-bed shortfall at the moment, and those issues in care and continuing healthcare as well, and the kind of postcode lottery that currently surrounds continuing healthcare.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Waggy's point is a really good one. It is extraordinary. If Gutman came up with the answers during the course of the Second World War, and Stoke Mandeville had this sorted, it is absolutely extraordinary. We've got this extraordinary cost. I mean, 3.8 million a day, 1,700 to 2,000 patients, and this is only one particular problem, bed sores. I mean, I do think we could really try and really push this.
Sorry.
Sorry, go on. But
yeah, I mean, what we need to look into, most importantly of all, is the model of service delivery that has changed from a holistic service from the first few hours or days following injury until discharge of the individual, fully rehabilitated and having achieved the maximum independence he or she is capable of. It is the model of service that has changed, together with the methods of treatment that have sadly over the last 25 years, I've been for 50 years almost, for the last 25 years, the outcomes have been deteriorating in almost every aspect and costing the taxpayer at least 3 or 4 times more than they used to. So cost study and of the model of service, its outcome in the community as well as in the hospital.
Okay, very helpful. Right, well, look, we said we'd go on for no more than an hour. We've just about hit the hour, I think. Everyone happy with the idea that we meet every 3 months on a Wednesday, 3:30, March, June, September, and then November, whatever the first Wednesday is. I think the next meeting, Dan, you're going to have the results of your survey. would we like to get a junior minister along who then can get the full earful from Waggy?
well, that
would
be
that,
fantastic.
would that be the best next step?
Well,
we need to move quickly because people are having to leave. So
yes, please.
Should we try and do that? Find out who the junior minister is, who will then responsible. Olivia, hang on, you've just said something. Whoops. Olivia, you wouldn't have to say that, but you've sent a long message.
I didn't want to take up time. I'm really just championing the immediate need of patients who have been separated from their friends and family at this very moment across spine units throughout the UK. Their friends and family are vital in the support that they need in the immediate phase during this traumatic event of spinal cord injury. And given that there's such a move across the UK to bring in relatives to care homes, I would really urge that the same could be done for spinal injury centres whose patients, their need is totally different from those in the rest of the hospital, but yet they're being classified amongst the same needs of those patients in a district general hospital. So anything that could be done by this group to encourage the Department of Health to really look on this and provide some funding for it. The solutions are obvious, they're really doable, and it would make a massive difference to those patients, to their families who are facing, you know, long-term injuries, but also to the staff as well.
Very good. Okay. Well, I think all that would be good to put to the junior minister. So if you're happy, I think I will write. Do you think is it Annie Waitley? I think she's the current one. Hopefully she'll be still there in first Wednesday in March. And I think that would be the first place to start. It'll rattle up her department. Her private office will have to prepare some papers. And we might begin to get it into the system as Dan suggested in his opening comments. So I propose we try and do that. So a presentation on what our survey shows, and then basically get her to comment on it, and we'll do a Q&A and have a real push getting along, first of all, MPs who represent spinal injury centres, and try and get more MPs involved. Anything else? Anyone else want to comment?
I just wanted to thank you for all what you're doing. It's so important.
Yeah.
It's important to have somebody in Parliament who's leading us.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Can I just say hello? I came very late. Sheila Hollins, I'm a crossbench member of the House of Lords. My daughter has a high-level spinal injury, and I was on another call, but I'm very pleased to be here and to join you.
So, thank you very much for coming along. Very nice to hear you just as we're about to close the meeting, but nice to get you in. Can you bring someone else along next time? I tell you, that's one thing we should all do. We should all go out and intend to bring more people to the next meeting to get the word out. Right, I think we've lost some members, but thank you everybody for coming along. Very interesting meeting. Dan, I'll ring you quickly now, just on the sort of messages we might put out after this. I'll ring you straight away on the mobile.
Fantastic.
And thank you, Dan and Dave, for your presentations and all the work at the SIA, and for Jordan, who behind the scenes has been pressing the buttons and keeping us vaguely in order. Thank you. Meet again, definitely in March, but I'm sure we'll all be speaking before then. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Meeting closed.